Welcome back to this month's episode of The Skin Check. The Skin Check with Jenn is a monthly segment hosted by me, Jenn Schultz, as an opportunity for low ultraviolet ambassadors and other skin cancer advocates to have a platform to share their story, offer advice, and share support for others. Today, I'm really excited to introduce you to Cheryl. Cheryl is a wife and stay-at-home mom of 3 boys living in Phoenix, Arizona. In addition to being a melanoma survivor, she also lives with chronic pain. Through her chronic pain, she used artist therapy and ended up using her artwork to build a chronic illness community and raise awareness for chronic pain. So, Cheryl, thank you so much for taking the time to be here today.
Thank you so much for having me, and I am really looking forward to this conversation.
Me too, because I think the chronic illness piece is something that we don't talk enough about when it comes to melanoma. So I'm really excited, especially to have you kick off for Melanoma Awareness Month. But before we get into all of that, I always like to start the episode by pointing out that we are more than our illness, even though sometimes it doesn't always feel that way. So in your words, I just want you to tell us a little bit more about you as a person before we start digging in and talking about chronic illness and melanoma.
Yeah, while my health journey is a very big part of my story, there's so much more to me as a person.
Yeah.
So something about me is that I have just always been a creative person from like a child. Um, Things that I love to do now are art and illustration. So I love drawing on my iPad, and I've actually had an Etsy shop since 2011 where I used to sell like tangible things, and then I had to move to like the digital world after having like my little kids and getting busy with that. I've done photography at one point. I love all things DIY. And then, of course, I'm a wife and a mom as well. So that takes up a lot of my time. So I just love being a creative person, and it really gets me through all the hard stuff.
Yeah, I was going to say, I mean, that makes sense. Your creativity and being able to tap into that as an outlet, I know has really helped you just through everything that's going on. And we will get there, I promise. But first, I want to talk to you a little bit about your skin cancer diagnosis. So you've actually had more than one, both melanoma and squamous cell. And not because those are like the most important or prevalent part of like your health history, but because a majority of our listeners are in the skin cancer community. So if you can just tell me a little bit more about how you found each of those, what your symptoms were, and then what your treatment plan looked like for each of those.
Yeah. So my first diagnosis was melanoma. So it's like, boom, here you go, hit with a big diagnosis. So I'll start with the year prior to that. It was my first skin check a year before I was diagnosed with melanoma. And I actually had 2 atypical moles and had to schedule surgeries for those and excisions. And so it kind of opened my eyes to, whoa, precancerous. Like, what does that mean? And so I just became very diligent about checking my skin after that. And then, my derm pretty much was like, you need to make sure you get regular skin checks yearly. One of the things that I wish I would have known a little bit more then was that multiple atypical moles usually means you're at higher risk for melanoma. And I was never told that. Maybe a good thing. So I didn't, be so paranoid about it. But so my melanoma was on my face. And I think when anyone thinks about where they would not want skin cancer, not that you want it anywhere, but the one part is the face. And so I had this pre-existing mole that I've had since I can remember. And I don't know, I can't explain what made me look at it and say, maybe I should bring this up to my dermatologist, but something just said, like, bring this up at your next appointment. So I actually had an appointment for rosacea with my derm, and my skin check wasn't for another 4 months after that. So I was like, let me bring this up and see what she says. So she looked at it with her dermoscope, and she goes, well, it looks a little off, but not too concerning. I think we can wait the 4 months until your next skin check. So I waited 4 months. And at my next skin check, we biopsied it. I think my derm hesitates on biopsying on the face. And I think she's mentioned that to me before because she's like, we don't want to do that unless we're really sure. So we biopsied it. And then I got the phone call, I think 9 days later or so, that I had melanoma. I didn't have any other symptoms. It was just the mole that kind of looked a little bit darker than the rest. I would say maybe it had like a little bit of shadowing around it as well, but that's not something you could really see with the naked eye. That was something when you really zoomed in, you could see. So my melanoma, I wouldn't say looked like melanoma.
Mm-hmm.
Whatever told me to go get checked that day with this, I'm thankful for, because, you know, this could have progressed, and being so close to my brain is very scary to think about in
Mm-hmm.
hindsight. So my treatment plan for that was surgery and a sentinel lymph node biopsy. So my biopsy went into the deep margins of where we didn't get clear margins to the edge. So it was like 0.6 millimeters. And typically they do a sentinel lymph node biopsy at 8.8 millimeters. Since mine went to the edge of the biopsy, we didn't know exactly how deep it was. So that's why I had a sentinel lymph node biopsy. So I had a pretty extensive surgery.
Yeah.
So my scar went all the way from here, all the way down my hairline, and then they removed a lymph node underneath my ear here. So it was
Okay.
about 20 stitches in my face. And so that was a rough recovery, but I am thankful that I found it early. And then moving on to the squamous cell, honestly, that was a huge shock, because I always thought, like, if I got skin cancer again, it would be melanoma. I just
Mm-hmm.
never thought that it would be like a different form of skin cancer. That one I had no idea about. It was on my bottom.
Okay.
So a place that you don't really see very often. You
Mm-hmm.
can't look there unless it's like a mirror. So that was very shocking. So I had no idea it was there. I didn't know what it looked like. I still don't know what it looks like. I almost feel like I should ask for a picture just so I can know what that looks like, to be aware for the future. But no symptoms there either. And my treatment plan there was, they actually didn't even give me an option for my treatment plan. She kind of just
Okay.
said, okay, we're going to do the freezing, and then we're going to do a chemo cream. Then she later said we could have done an excision, but she said since it was in situ and it was
Mm-hmm.
very small, she thought it would be appropriate to do the freezing and then the chemo cream twice a day for 3 weeks. So as of right now, I guess I could say, you know, the cancer is gone. I hope. One of my questions to her was, how do we know, you know, without an excision and clear margins, like I was used to with the
With
first skin
melanoma.
cancer,
Yeah.
how do we know this cancer is gone? And so it's basically a monitoring thing. So when I go back to my next skin check, she's going to say, okay, there's no pigment back. Actually, my squamous cell was a pigmented squamous cell, which is, I guess, very rare. So as long as there's no signs of that skin cancer coming back, then that's how I guess we know that it's gone.
Yeah. So it's interesting because, like, just to think about, especially like the difference between the symptoms, skin cancer tends to get lumped together, and
Mm-hmm.
like the way that you would catch melanoma versus squamous cell or basal cell is so different. And I've had a basal cell, but even with basal cell, I know from one person to the next they can look really different. But I
Yeah.
also don't know that I would know what to look for squamous cell also.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and even going to melanoma, you know, talking to my derm, I mean, I think she says she sees more that don't look like melanoma these days than actually the ABCDs of melanoma. So that's kind of
Interesting.
scary too. It feels
Yeah.
like it's developing into, you know, obviously we still look for the ABCDs of melanoma, but more and more, I think they're finding that some of these skin cancers don't really look like these skin cancers.
Hmm.
So that's also scary, and why there's the importance of getting your skin checked.
Yeah, even I know with my second recurrence, it ended up being a stage 1B, but when they removed it, we removed it just because I had like a white halo around it. And so that can be
Mm-hmm.
a sign, not even necessarily that that spot is cancerous, but that there is a cancerous spot. And so they removed it really out of an abundance of caution. And he's like, I mean, I would look at this and say you have almost a zero risk of this being cancerous. And they actually
Wow.
ended up sending it to a pathologist in California to get a second opinion because they were so shocked that it actually did come back as melanoma. So,
Wow.
yeah, so I think, melanoma and the appearance of skin cancers are changing, but it just makes it that much more important to not only be getting the regular skin checks, but also really having a care team that you trust.
Yeah. And, you know, doing the self skin checks as
Hmm.
well, and monitoring if there's been any changes. You know, there are some areas where it is really hard to monitor, and like, you know, your back or, you know, the bottom your bottom or
Mm-hmm.
anywhere like that where you can't really see very well with your own eyes. So, yeah, I agree. I mean, skin checks to me are a non-negotiable for the foreseeable future.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's great that they have growing technology too, where it's
Mhm.
easier to track a lot of those things. Not even just with the dermatologist, but even things that you can like attach to your phone and stuff like that to get better pictures. Like we are not
Yeah,
doctors, but it's sending a much clearer picture to our dermatologist without having to go in and make an appointment in between skin checks.
right.
So, another thing that I wanted to talk about and really make sure we mention, because we haven't talked about this ever in the podcast before, but many in the skin cancer and melanoma communities, especially those with a melanoma diagnosis who have gone through like immunotherapy and things like that, live with chronic pain as a result of their treatment. And so you've been battling chronic pain and illness for many years. What challenges did you face in even getting an initial diagnosis for the cause of the pain and symptoms? Because I know that that was a pretty difficult journey for you.
Yeah. And the chronic pain became, that was a big part of my life even before the cancer's
Mm-hmm.
diagnosis. So it was like, I was going through all this and then let's just add cancer to the list as
Mm-hmm.
well. So I have several chronic pain diagnoses. So I'll kind of just focus on the one that affects me the most, which is new daily persistent headache. And so just to kind of give you a background of what that is I woke up specifically remembering the day it was February 3rd, 2021 with a headache. I thought it was a normal headache, took ibuprofen, went about my day and never went away. Next day, same thing. You do everything you can to get rid of a headache with, just, Aleve, ibuprofen, Tylenol. And so now I'm over 4 years into the same headache that's never gone away since I woke up with it that day. And it is considered a refractory condition, which means that it's just not responsive to any medications that I've tried. So the biggest challenge in the beginning was actually finding a doctor who didn't just shove a bunch of pills at me and
Mm-hmm.
say, here, let's mask the symptoms versus like finding the root cause. I have always said, like, where is the medical curiosity anymore? As a doctor, why don't you want to find what is really wrong with me?
Mm-hmm.
Why are we just shoving pills my way and saying, here? Now, I appreciate that for the short term of pain relief, but I want to know, like, I don't think we can resolve this until we find the root cause. And so I actually diagnosed myself before I got an official diagnosis because the two neurologists I originally had seen were dismissing so many of my,
Mm-hmm.
thoughts of could this be this? Could this be this? Could this be this? But new daily persistent headache has a pretty pinpoint, symptom diagnosis. And that's if you can specifically remember the day that your headache started, if it's been longer than 3 months and it's never stopped. So to me, it was like a blanket like diagnosis for me. This is what I have. When I found my now amazing neurologist, she validated everything for me from the first appointment and she acknowledged all of my concerns and gave me a diagnosis on paper. But that was a big challenge until I found her, who is a headache specialist. And if anyone out there is struggling with, chronic headaches or migraines, my biggest piece of advice is to find a headache specialist and not a general neurologist. I think a lot of people don't understand that general neurologists really don't have much education on headaches and migraines. They are a big scope of different neurological conditions. So finding someone who's in headaches and migraines is crucial to, getting answers basically. But it was difficult to find. I had to go through a couple of dismissive, doctors before I found the one that I'm currently working with now.
Yeah, well, there's a few things that I want to touch on. The first one, it makes so much sense, right? Like we don't think of it, but it makes so much sense that you need to find the person in the specialty that's also specialized with what you have. Because even if
Mm-hmm.
you think about dermatology has such a wide variety of
Yeah.
different like specialties within it. And when I started mole mapping 2 years ago. And when I started doing that, there was one doctor specifically within the clinic that did it. And he actually made me change the dermatologist I had been seeing before. And he's like, with your history, you need to be seeing somebody who specializes in dysplastic nevi, which had never even occurred to me. And I cried because
Yeah.
emotional reactions and things, right? And I was like, oh my gosh, I haven't
Hmm.
been getting the care I deserve, and I didn't know it.
Right.
And it was the shock, but also thank goodness that somebody is finally having this conversation, because now I'm getting what I need moving forward. But I think with some of those other specialties that we're not as familiar with, like, yeah, I would just think, okay, I can go to a neurologist, but not recognizing that I need to make sure that I'm seeing somebody that specializes in headaches.
Yeah. And I think that's a big mistake that a lot of people make in the beginning. And that's why, with my platform that I have, I try to give that advice to people who are just starting in their journey so they don't waste their time and their energy or their money or all of that, wasting their money in prescriptions and that kind of stuff too. And just to know that there are headache specialists out there and
Hmm.
they are a big world of a difference in your care.
Yeah. Well, and then you also mentioned that she was the first one that made you feel really seen and heard.
Hmm.
And I know so many people that feel that way, which is the other reason that I wanted to touch on it. But it's because a lot of times, like you said, they just want to mask it or try to fix the problem, but they're really putting a band-aid on it in the short term, because unless
Hmm.
they know what's causing it, they aren't really fixing it. At
Yeah.
best, it's a temporary solution.
Yeah. And to me, if you're a doctor who has spent all this time, in med school and caring for people, to me, I don't understand why there's so many doctors who just don't want to know the root cause of things. They just want to give you all these prescriptions or, just like, well, we don't really know, but it's because they haven't really looked into it. And that's very unfortunate because I think people are looking for answers and they're not getting
Hmm.
those answers.
Yeah, I hear it from so many people these days. And I've had migraines, and I know how much like a migraine can take me out for like a portion of the day, but it's nothing compared to, I couldn't even tell you the date of my last migraine, let alone being in such significant pain that I can tell you the exact date that it started, and it's never ended. And so
Hmm.
just putting a band-aid on it, or like, here, take this pill, like, that just isn't an option.
Yeah, I agree.
So you talked a lot about like what it is like for you on a daily basis, but like, how do you manage that? You have this headache that started on February 3rd a few years back and has never gone away. How do you manage that on a day-to-day basis, especially with three boys? Because I can't imagine
Yeah.
even one boy is enough, and
Well,
you've got a full household.
one of my boys is an adult, so that's a little bit easier now than it used to be. But my other two are 6 and 9. So definitely ages where there's a lot going on.
Hmm.
But so how I manage that is, I mean, chronic pain and illness don't just clock out. They're there for the long haul. And so I think one of the hardest parts is the unpredictability of things. Waking up on a day to day basis, you really don't know what your pain level is going to look like. So it's hard to make plans and it's hard to say, I'm going to do this task tomorrow and I'm going to go grocery shopping or clean the house because you don't really know what that day is going to look like until you wake up. And sometimes I wake up and I'm not in much pain, but as the day goes by, I start getting in more and more and more pain to where the end of the night is like brutal for me. But for me, it's just a constant battle of, you know, what I want to do and what my body allows me to do. And so managing it is just a mix of pacing myself, managing my symptoms, and listening to my body. So sometimes that's really hard when, you're a parent, you don't really have a choice to, not parent.
Hmm. Yeah.
But just listening to my body, getting more rest when I need to, and then the online community has just been amazing to help me cope and manage too. So I'd say, the unpredictability is one of the hardest things, and I think most people with chronic pain and illness will agree with that. It's just every day looks different. So I think that's really hard, but managing it, like I said, is just taking it day by day, symptom by symptom, and pacing is just very important.
Hmm. And you said something that, in a different way, I think a lot of people will relate to, or that it will resonate with, where there's what you want to do and then what your body will allow you to do. And I think
Right.
even if it's like recovering from like a wide local excision or sentinel like lymph node biopsy or some sort of surgery or immunotherapy or whatever, like, I just think that resonates so much within this community. And for
Mm-hmm.
you, you really turn to your creativity and your artwork, not just to help manage pain, but also as a form of therapy. Can you share a little bit more about that? Because I think having those outlets is such a big thing when we're frustrated in other pieces of our life. Like, what can we turn to?
Yeah. Art has been a huge therapy for me because it allows me to kind of get in a creative space. Sometimes that's hard when you're having like extreme head pain too, but it just gives me an outlet to think about something other than the pain, even if it's just for a little bit. So, I mean, for me, distraction is like key with coping. And so, art has just been something that I've kind of taught myself over the years to get better at. It's like, just something that I wanted to broaden with an online community with. So this is just like a something where I took my talents and then I wanted to like have other people see those talents as well, but then to draw pieces that really relate to what I'm going through. And I think sometimes art can put into words that you can't actually like verbalize yourself.
Mm-hmm.
And so I think, that's it's been a big blessing for me to have that outlet. And I always tell people, giving advice to anybody is, find something that makes you happy and it's a good distraction for you. Whether that's reading or doing a puzzle or going for a walk. I think all of us can relate to getting in a space where it's a negative one and the pain consumes us. And so finding an outlet that gives you the distraction to just get away from that, like I said, even if it's just for a little bit, is very important.
Mm-hmm. We have to find reasons to look forward to things and be able to find, I hate to say the positive because toxic positivity is
Yeah.
definitely a thing, but there has to be things that we enjoy or bring joy to our day. And sometimes those things too help us to find like those communities. I know artwork, you mentioned how you were able to build community through your artwork, connect with other people, and really wanted to create things that resonated with other people. And you already sort of touched on how much having a community has helped you just manage the pain on a day-to-day basis too. What are some like really tangible ways that that community has helped?
It almost like kind of makes me emotional to think about
Mm-hmm.
how much it's
Yeah.
changed my life. I think connecting with others has been life changing. I often receive messages from people saying, that I've put their feelings into words that they couldn't necessarily express. And I always tell people that, while they're here on my page, and thinking that I'm helping them, I always tell them that they're helping me just as much as I'm helping them. And so, this journey isn't like one-sided. It's like we navigate this journey together. And that's what the community that I'm bringing is like the goal is that you're not alone and that, there's this big community of people who, really get it. And
Mm-hmm.
I think that just makes people immediately feel so much less alone. But as the community grows, it just gets better and better. And, it's just been a big part of how I've coped with chronic illness and pain is just knowing that I'm not alone. I think a lot of people who get a diagnosis don't necessarily know someone in their current life who can relate.
Mm-hmm.
And so that's where the isolation starts. And so then they start reaching out like, well, who can I relate to? Whether that's a Facebook group that they join for their specific condition or Instagram or blogs or Reddit pages. I mean, so they're just like reaching out for help.
Mm-hmm.
And that's kind of what I did too. It's like this was my journey that I was documenting through my life as well. That's kind of where my name came from is Dear Chronic Pain, almost like my journal of chronic illness and pain and what that looks like for me. And then it just kind of turned into like, sharing my journey, but then really getting into advocacy and advice and that kind of thing too. But this has been, honestly, I don't know where I would be mentally if I didn't have this community. So it's just been such a big blessing in my life. And so I also say that like I'm a kind of person that like heals out loud.
Mm-hmm.
And so, some people heal silently, some people heal out loud. I heal out loud. And this has really brought like purpose to my pain.
I love that. Just you saying I heal out loud, like that resonates with me so much, which probably makes sense why I'm doing this type of podcast.
Yeah.
But because it does make such a difference when you find somebody, you're like, oh my gosh, they're putting into words, they're putting into art what I wish I could say, but haven't been able to. And it makes you feel seen, especially because especially chronic illness, which is such an invisible disease, you look healthy even when you're on your worst days. People don't realize that sometimes unless you share it. And so you relate to that struggle and you're able to like help be there for those people that are also facing that and feeling alone and isolated in it. What is it that you wish people that don't understand chronic illness and chronic pain that they're not able to experience? What would you say to like help them better understand what it's like?
Yeah, I feel like I could probably spend an hour on this one question. But what I think, I wish people knew more was that chronic illness can look so different on so many people and chronic pain. So, for instance, like, your aunt that has fibromyalgia may be bedridden and that's what you see as a fibromyalgia diagnosis. But then the next person says they have fibromyalgia and they're out walking around and they're doing things in life and they're able to work. And so then it turns into, oh, well, she's faking it because my aunt is bedridden. And so even though two people can share the same diagnosis, it looks very, very different for so many people.
Mm-hmm.
And so I think that's where a lot of the stigma is created into, oh, are you really in pain? Do you really have that diagnosis? It seems like, people being told that they're faking it is actually a real thing that happens way too often. It's unfortunate that people are going through this isolated journey only to hear something like that where, they're faking it. And, being sick is not a choice. It's just something that happens. And I think one of the things that I wish people realize too is that you can get chronically ill at any moment of time. One
Mm-hmm.
day you can be completely healthy living your life, and the next day you wake up and your whole life flips upside down. And so I feel like, it just, I don't know. What I want people to know is that it takes a toll on more than just your body too. This is a diagnosis that affects your relationships, your friendships, your job, everything in your life.
Mm-hmm.
And so I think people don't realize the effects that it can have on you. And, there's a lot of awareness that still needs to be, worked on out there to get people to understand, because there's still so many negative things that are being said about people in the chronic pain or in the chronic pain and illness community. And so, yeah, I think just, to backtrack, just wanting people to understand that it looks differently for everybody and that no two diagnoses are the same, and that it takes a toll on every aspect of our life, and it's not a choice. It's just something we have to live with. Can't just there's many chronic illnesses and chronic pain conditions that are
Mm-hmm.
incurable. And so it's not like we can just take a pill and feel better and move on with our day. There's many people who are really struggling trying to find treatment plans that work.
Which is why it's so hurtful and really almost harmful to hear, like, oh, I think you're just faking it or you can't be in that much pain, because nobody wishes that were true more than you.
And to touch on that too, I think many of us who live with chronic pain learn to really adapt to it over time. So, like, when I tell people that when I first started, this headache, I would say my pain probably was at about a 7 out of 10 to begin with.
Mm-hmm.
Now I say that my baseline sits at about a 4. And I kind of think to myself, is it because I'm used to it now and I'm coping with it better and I'm just so used to it being there that now it's a 4? Or, or did it get better? But I think it's just that I've learned to live with it. And
Mm-hmm.
so, I kind of try to put it in the back of my head and think like, okay, like, this is just an everyday part of my life. I have to move forward. And so I think, the chronic pain scale looks very differently for everybody too. But I think a lot of people end up adapting to their pain and learning. You have to learn how to live with it, because otherwise you'd be in bed all day long and you wouldn't have a life.
Yeah, I have a student actually. She's actually been in high school, but she's a PSEO student where I'm an adjunct instructor, and she did let me know on the first day about like her health challenges. And she said, I'm living with chronic pain because of this specific illness. And I've gotten really good at like masking it and hiding it and coping it. And so if you ever see me in pain, like just wanting to let you know it's a really bad pain day, because typically
Right.
I'm able to not show it.
Yeah. I've heard that a lot too, and I say that myself as well, because nobody wants to talk about their pain constantly, because then people just get annoyed by you. They're just like, okay, it's another pain day, like what's new, and I'm tired of hearing about it. So a lot of times people really, say they go in this silent battle of keeping it to themselves, because who's going to talk about their pain every single day and feel like they're a burden to somebody that's close to them. So yeah, you kind of learn to just mask it and move on as best as you can throughout the day. But I agree, those high pain days, you can't really mask all the time. And so it's true, when you see me really in pain, then you really know it's a bad pain day, because all the other days, usually I'm good at masking it. So
Mm-hmm.
yeah, I can relate to that.
I also want to point out something really important. I think you also just said about feeling like a burden, because it should be okay to talk about your pain and it shouldn't be
Mm-hmm.
annoying. But when you are the person that's going through it and having health challenges, whether it's chronic pain or really any type of illness, even like recovering from a surgery and stuff, sometimes we just feel like, at what point will we be too much of a burden on people that they won't want to be in our lives anymore because of this illness?
Right. And so, what I have to say to that is, no one is a burden with their illness or pain or whatever they're going through, cancer diagnosis. And if the people in your life feel like you're a burden, I would maybe try to wean those people out, because they're not very healthy for you going
Mm-hmm.
through this time. I think it's easy to feel like you're a burden with everything. But I think deep down, if you look at everything, you have to realize that this isn't my fault.
Mm-hmm.
I'm not doing these things because I want to. I'm not saying these things. I'm not acting this way because I want to. It's a hard diagnosis that you're dealing with, and this is just how you're handling it, and you're doing the best that you can. But I hear a lot of people say that they feel like a burden, and I think that's very unfortunate, because who's making you feel like that?
Mm-hmm.
Is it you, or is it someone making you feel like a burden? So sometimes, to be in a healthier mental state, you have to, kind of wean these people out that are making you feel that way.
There's nothing like an illness to help you really reevaluate the people in your life. And it
Yeah.
goes back to something you said at the beginning, where we didn't choose whether it's to have melanoma, have chronic pain, have chronic illness, but we do have choice. And that's who we surround ourselves with. And even when we feel like we're a burden, having the right people around us are going to help ease that. And those are the
Mm-hmm.
people that are going to show up no matter what, reassure us that we are not the burden. The illness
Yes.
might be, but it's just as much of a burden on us as it is on anyone else, and they want to be there to help and support.
Yeah. Those are the people you keep around, because
Mm-hmm.
they are your biggest supporters, and you need support through any illness or diagnosis. It's literally detrimental to have support if you want to, be in good spirits and good mental health. Support is just everything. So find your supportive people. We not the ones that aren't so supportive.
And I want to finish up with two questions that are really a, more of like advice. So one you've touched on a little bit before this, but because you did face so many barriers to getting a diagnosis, finding a treatment that actually helped with the pain, what advice would you give to someone else that's navigating those same barriers and same challenges?
Um, so I've learned a lot throughout my journey. And I would say one of the biggest pieces of advice I would give is advocacy for yourself. There's a lot of doctors that are wrong out there.
Mm-hmm.
And I think people don't realize that not every doctor is meant for you, and not every doctors are wrong all the time, right? So nobody knows your body best than yourself. And so you have to go with those instincts that you have, knowing something is wrong. And if it takes 3, 4 doctors to go through until you find somebody who actually will listen to you and give you a good treatment plan. I think that is very important, that I've learned that, not every doctor is a good fit.
Mm-hmm.
And so my biggest piece of advice would just be advocating for yourself and, just finding a doctor that's on your side. I can't express enough how my current doctor has changed even the way that I cope now, just because she believed me and she validated all of my concerns. To me, that made my whole mental health change, just knowing that I had somebody on my side. And so, just I think advocacy is just the biggest part of anyone's journey. Is I think, with invisible illnesses, I think there's a lot of people who, there's even doctors who have told patients like, oh, you don't look sick, or you look great. There's nothing wrong with you. Your labs are normal. Don't ever take that as an answer. And in fact, if a doctor says that to you, I'd find a new
Mm-hmm.
one.
Yeah,
No one
absolutely.
deserves to hear, your labs are normal, you're fine, when you're pleading to them that you've had this life-changing symptom. The other biggest piece of advice I would give to people is giving specific examples of how that symptom or illness is changing your life. So whether that looks like, I've been calling in so much to work, I'm worried I'm going to lose my job. To me, that kind of humanizes you a little bit
Mm-hmm.
to the doctor. I think a lot of times we don't have a lot of like humanizing and connection going on there. The doctor just sees you as a symptom. They don't really see you as a person.
Mm-hmm.
And so I think when you kind of bring that person in and say, I have children and I am in so much pain that I can't even like finish their homework with them, or I can't do activities that I would love to do with them because my illness or my pain is affecting that. When you bring in those scenarios, I think it really helps the doctor paint a little bit better of a picture of how this is affecting you. And I really do think that makes a huge difference in your care and, maybe being a little bit more believable if they didn't believe you before. And giving those examples, I think, is huge to have them better understand how it's affecting your life.
Yeah, that's amazing advice. That's one I haven't heard before, but I know so many people that go to the doctor and they feel that they're treated as just another appointment or just another number and don't feel like they're being
Patient
seen as
number
a person.
29,
Yeah,
yeah.
exactly. And any way that you can humanize that experience, or maybe sharing the human side of it, makes that doctor take a step back and be like, oh my gosh, like, what if I couldn't do this? And they're able to
Mhm.
sort of like empathize, which unfortunately is sometimes missing in patient rooms.
Yeah. Yeah, I think compassion and empathy really lacks in the medical world. The doctor sometimes is even thinking about what time it is because they got to get to their next patient and they're
Mm-hmm.
not even fully looking and understanding what you're saying too. So compassion goes a long way. I think that's what people are looking for, is just like even a doctor saying, I'm so sorry you're going through this. Let's try to figure out a way. And I think also too, another big piece of advice is that advocate for individualized care. Again, going back to every patient is different. We all know that there are exceptions to the rule or exceptions to the statistics that, you might show differently than the next person who has your same diagnosis. And so, doctors really should be looking at you as a person, your lifestyle, your diet, everything about you to make a more individualized treatment plan. And it really should be a treatment plan that you both agree on. I've had so many doctors just say, I'm going to put you on this, instead of saying, how do you feel about taking this medication?
Mm-hmm.
I'm just feel like I'm being forced. And how many people either don't fill that prescription or they fill it and they never take it.
Mm-hmm.
So I think, individualizing a plan for a patient is huge because we're all so different, so different, environmentally, physically, mentally, and all the aspects. Fight for individualized care as well. It should be a collaborative approach between doctor and patient.
Absolutely. We should feel like we still have some control over our health as well, even if it's just
Yeah.
this isn't the right medication, or having options to choose from when it comes to treatment.
Yeah. And I think a lot of patients just go based off of what the doctor says
Mm-hmm.
instead of what they really want. So it's like, if you want an MRI, ask for an MRI. Don't wait for them to not mention it to you. You want an MRI? Say, can I get an MRI? You
Mm-hmm.
know? And I think it's very doctor led. And I wish it was more, like I said, a collaborative approach, and a good doctor will make it a collaborative approach. But I think a lot of patients don't understand that they have the utmost control in that appointment. It is their body, what they want. Do I want to take this med? Do I want to take that treatment plan? And really, you should go in there with a bunch of questions, that you want answered. And then you should tell the doctor what you want as a patient too. And obviously, take your doctor's advice too. But if it's something that you don't agree with, then don't feel afraid to stand up and say, I don't agree with that. I don't want to do that. I think doctors need to hear that more.
And if they're not willing to listen, or at least listen to your concerns, they're not the right doctor. The same way we
Totally agree.
reevaluate our friend circle, we can reevaluate our care team at any time. So the last question is one that we ask at the end of every episode, but I'm going to give you a little bit of a choice on this one. And so you could lean one way or the other or both. But what is the biggest change you would like to see in regards to chronic illness and or skin cancer?
Honestly, I feel like I could probably say the same thing for both. So this is just going to go for all healthcare in general. And I think awareness, recognition, and understanding, I think in both of those categories is huge. The other thing that I just talked about was individualized care. I think that is very important when it comes to, finding a doctor that really goes based off of you, your symptoms, your body, and what you want as a treatment plan, and not just comparing you to the next patient that had the same diagnosis. And then I would also say more research and funding. I think we could all agree that in any part of healthcare that really lacks. And that's why we have to do fundraising events and go to Capitol Hill and ask for these type of things, because there is a lack everywhere in every category. So I would say all of those things that I would say for both, just healthcare in general, whether that's skin cancer, chronic illness, or chronic pain, that I think that's like a big, it could go both ways. It could go for every illness and diagnosis out there.
Yeah. I think a lot of people see a lot of advancements and new treatments and think like, wow, we're doing amazing things. But when you're on the inside and you're that person, there isn't something to treat your pain. There isn't an effective treatment for your type of cancer or for your type of melanoma. Like, you are so aware of, yes, how far we've come, but how far we have yet to go.
Right. And I mean, that's for the people who actually know the advancements in treatments. I think many patients don't. I think us advocates do, because we look into those things. But, are these doctors even telling these patients about the current advancements and the current, whatever is happening that's newer? I think that's also kind of like left in the dark for us to figure out sometimes as well.
Yeah. Well, Cheryl, thank you so much. This has been an incredible conversation. I think so many people are going to get a ton out of it, be able to connect with different pieces of your story and relate to it. For anyone who is listening, I know you did mention your Instagram handle before and why it is Dear Chronic Pain, but for those who want to connect or hear more about your story, where can they find you?
So you can find me at Instagram. And so it's Dear Chronic Pain, but there's underscores in between. So it's Dear, DEAR _ chronic _ pain.
And we'll have that linked in the show notes too. So thank you so much,
Yes.
Cheryl. I really appreciate you taking the time to have this really important conversation today.
Yes. And I appreciate you for having me. And yes, I think this was such an important conversation. And I really hope that people listening can, take a little bit of advice here, feel like they're not alone, and, just feel like they've got someone on their side as well.
That's what we're here for. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you.